Good afternoon all. Welcome to our next workshop devoted to security of critical infrastructure. Today we will be unpacking supply chain security and mitigating insider threat within your supply chain security. It's a pretty complex topic, so we'll go through that. Keeping what good looks like in mind, let's have a look at the diagram. This is our presentation of risk-based supply chain mapping and categorization framework with 8 key steps in this framework. The first step is establish governance and oversight, because without governance, it's really hard to keep it live, to have plan, do, check, act cycle embedded into that. Another thing with identification of major suppliers or conducting supply chain mapping, which we know can be pretty tricky, is linked to the scope of your exercise. You need to, as SOCIAC says, you know your critical assets. You need to identify critical components within those critical assets. You need to understand the threat environment, and you need to know security risks to those critical components. And that will help you to map suppliers that have relationship with those critical components, whether they can directly support, maintain, or provide inputs to critical components of your critical assets. Step 3 is mapping your supply chain. This is when we're talking about tiers of suppliers. You can have your direct suppliers within tier 1, and then you have further tiers within your supply chain, which can be suppliers of your suppliers. Then when you identified your suppliers, you will need to work out who sit within the definition of major suppliers. And we'll quickly go to the next slide and come back to this diagram.
So in terms of supplier-based risk categorisation, there's 3 things we're trying to establish here. What type of supplier? Now, the SOCI Act and rules talk about major suppliers, and they describe that, and we'll go to that slide in a moment. That means, of course, anyone that's not a major supplier would be a non-major supplier, but it's that type of supplier you need to, in that binary sense, choose. In terms of the tier of supply, we've approached this as tier 1, a major supplier linked to a critical asset or component, and you have a direct contract with them. Tier 2, we're talking about the next layer out to a degree, the suppliers to those major suppliers, which you may not have a direct contract with, but which can actually impact your asset or components. And then tier 3, all other suppliers. We have seen other models where there are more tiers listed, but in reality, what's the benefit? If they're not tier 1 or tier 2, how relevant are they? So if it's janitorial supplies or stationery or whatever else, are they really critical to your operations? No. So they can all get bundled into tier 3. And we think that's a good way to actually separate the wheat from the chaff quite well. And then we'll talk about the category of risk, and we'll explain those 6 risk criteria to you.
Before that, let's quickly have a look at definition of major suppliers. Major supplier means any vendor that by nature just a sec. It moved. Of their product or services they offer have significant influence over the security of your entity's critical infrastructure asset. So once again, major suppliers, they're narrowed down to the security of your critical components. And that's important to keep in mind. When you identified your major suppliers, the question is how to categorize them. Are they all the same, or do they have a different weight attached to them? This is where we came up on the best practice with 6 criteria for risk-based supply chain mapping, which is operational criticality. Can this supplier disrupt, degrade, or stop a critical function or component? Substitution difficulty. How quickly could we replace this supplier? Privileged access. Does the supplier or its personnel have access that could alter, disable key systems controls?
And geography, or the jurisdiction or the sovereignty exposure. Where is the supplier and their data or delivery source located from? Are they in a high risk or sanctioned jurisdiction? 5 there, assurance maturity. Can the supplier demonstrate effective controls, screening, identity management, access management, logging, and so on? And the modern slavery risk. Do the supplier's operations, do their sector or geography show indicators of exploitation or poor labour transparency, or a possible vulnerability to that?
While we're on modern slavery risk, if you're at the beginning of your supply chain mapping or supply chain risk management framework implementation, modern slavery, and if you're subject to the Modern Slavery Act that was introduced the same year as the SOCI Act, you might find the foundation you have built through modern slavery as a great starting point, because there are similarities, though type of risk is different. There are similarities around modern slavery and SOCI in terms of supply chain management. So going back to our diagram, just to go through, where we have just been, we categorized suppliers. Then it is about looking at controls depending on the risk tier, then integration with enterprise process, and then of course plan, do, check, act in terms of improvement, once again linking it to governance. With integration with enterprise processes, that's about embedding this process, not to have it siloed, embedding within enterprise business management systems and your risk management program.
And just to make the point there on number 6, assign controls by risk tier, we're not advocating that you'll be able to mitigate every supply chain risk. For instance, if your major supplier there is Microsoft, I mean, we appreciate in a contractual sense you'll probably have no capacity to get Microsoft to do anything different that might meet your security needs, but at the very least you must identify them. And if the risk register then says, we've gone to Microsoft, for instance, with this request and they've said no, well, at least you've treated it as best you could. So please don't think this is an advocacy to rewrite contracts. It is not. You've got to work within the confines of what you have now.